Greetings, everybody. Welcome to the Wednesday, April 1st, 2020 episode of Free Webinar Wednesdays. This is Eric Cook with WSI Digital, working with our clients and customers to help them connect and engage with their customers online. Hop over to poweredbywsi.com to learn more about us and all the fun stuff we get to do, although it seems like in today's kind of new reality, we're spending an awful lot of time building COVID alert notifications, information pages, and all sorts of other important information for our clients to keep their customers informed as to what's going on. So before I kick off today's webinar, I just want to kind of extend I hope everybody is doing well wish and you are safe and healthy, getting accustomed to working from home if you are not used to doing that, and kind of exploring some of the benefits of working in your pajamas. Although I think kids and animals and other sorts of things going on might be distracting to you a little bit, but it's just the world we live in and we have to get through it. So I appreciate you taking some time out of your day to join me on today's webinar. Today's webinar is a continuation of prior webinars where we've been talking about WSI's third edition of Digital Minds. And I had the pleasure of being included as a contributing author in the first two editions, and I was included in the third. So my chapter for this 2020 version of Digital Minds talks all about the concept of conversational marketing and the influence of artificial intelligence and chatbots. And I've got some slides here that I'm excited to share with you that will just set the stage of what it is that I talked about in the chapter, and hopefully you'll be interested in popping out and maybe snagging a copy of the book, downloading it on Kindle. It is available now on Amazon in both the United States and in Canada. It was on early release in Canada, but I checked and it is out there now. So you can get access to it directly through Amazon, and would love to hear what you think. Before we jump into the formal presentation, just as a reminder, today's show and all shows here on Free Webinar Wednesdays are recorded and made available at freewebinarwednesdays.com. So if what we talk about today is something that you'd like to share with a friend, colleague, or coworker, or a fellow shut-in that can't get out and experience the out of doors and social interaction, and they're looking for webinar content to consume, maybe you can send them this. My father shared with me a funny meme that he caught on Facebook that I'll just kind of mention here, because we're a dog family here in the Cook household. They've even got their own Facebook page called the Cook Dogs. But he read something off of Facebook that said this coronavirus pandemic stay-at-home order is turning us all into our dogs, because who would have thought that we would have all gotten so excited when somebody made the mention of going for a car ride. And I don't know about you, those of you that have dogs probably know how crazy they get when you say you want to go for a walk or you want to go bye-bye. And as all of us are basically staying indoors and not going anyplace, even just getting in the car and driving around and listening to the radio, and if you can roll the windows down, even better, is something to look forward to these days, which seems kind of weird, but it is what it is. So those of you that are attending live, thank you so much for joining the show. And as part of the live webinar experience, I'm very interested in hearing what you have to say and what your thoughts are. So if you would like to go ahead and maybe while we're going through today's webinar, one of the challenges for today is on all of these other chapters, and I've got them lined up probably through the end of May, I would suspect, until we get through the rest of the chapters for the book. It's always been me interviewing one of the other authors. So there's been a back and forth conversation. I've been able to ask questions and things have sparked. So I'm going to lean on you, the live audience, as the other participant in today's webinar, as I go through and share information about the chapter that I wrote I'd really like to hear from you as to what questions you have, maybe share a story if you've engaged with a chatbot or have experienced AI in any of your dealings with, and we're spending more of our time online today now than ever. Would certainly love to hear more about what you have to say and what you think about the whole concept of conversational marketing. So without further ado, let's go ahead and we'll get into it. So we're going to first chat a little bit about the whole concept of conversational marketing and being able to build that dialogue and how that's happening and continuing to evolve. We'll talk a little bit about how artificial intelligence is making us smarter. It's not going to replace the human, and we'll talk about some of the things AI and technology does really well and some of the things that we as humans still need to be very much involved in. We're going to talk about this thing called the uncanny valley and why you want to stay away from it. It's not a good place to be, not any place that you want to hang out. And many of you, I'm curious if any of you that are attending the show live, just in chat, if you've heard of the term uncanny valley. It was a term introduced to me by a colleague that does a lot of speaking in the banking arena, talking about technology and AI and bots. So I decided to borrow some of that. So a big hat tip to my friend Lee Wetherington over at the Jack Henry world. But he talks a lot about the uncanny valley, and I'm going to mention it, how it relates to artificial intelligence and chatbots. So I'm keeping an eye on the chat to see whether any of you have heard of it before, and I'm not seeing any come through. So I have a feeling you might learn something new today, maybe a couple things. And then kind of wrap up just talking a little bit more in general nature about the benefits of chatbots and as a service agent, as a sales agent, as a revenue enhancer, as a conversion optimizer, as an expense reducer. There's a lot of different things from a chatbot perspective as it's part of this conversation that we'll want to make sure to explore, and maybe we'll get you interested in adding a bot to your lineup. We're actually right now being contacted by one of our clients, and they are very interested in implementing a text message notification service, which could be seen in some ways as a bot because they send out an automated message. You can respond back with some sort of a request, and it can then provide follow-up information, particularly in light of what's going on with the government announcing new loan programs and the immediacy that these bots provide you with the ability to not only get information to people very quickly, but in most instances, things like your mobile device, text messages, chat, whether it's Facebook or WhatsApp or even web-based chat on your actual website itself, those typically are getting paid attention to a lot faster, and you'll be able to get your question answered maybe more quickly because it might be something that the system already has intelligence built within it to be able to answer, or if not, agents are able to handle multiple chat conversations at the same time instead of just having a one-on-one conversation. Think about it. If you're having a conversation with someone on the telephone, you can't have another conversation with somebody. But if you're managing some sort of a chat functionality, that gives you the ability to manage 4, 5, maybe 6 different conversations at the same time, because you're going to have a break in the conversation when somebody else is replying back to you. So to set the stage for what we're going to talk about here is Twilio is a platform out there in the digital space, and they do some stuff in the messaging arena, and they've done a little bit of research, and this is one of the statistics that was in the chapter that I wrote. But when consumers are really looking to use messaging for communication, which means they don't want to get in their car and drive to the office, they don't want to pick up the phone, but they're looking for some sort of an electronic message, a vast majority of consumers prefer messaging and the bot, kind of the messaging back and forth versus an email message capability. And I know for me, and maybe it's the same for you, I'd be curious, but when I go to a website, one of the very first things that I'll go to, whether it's for support or if it's for sales or if I just have a general question and I'm looking for something, I first look to see whether they have a chat functionality. And if they have chat, what I first do is determine whether it's a bot. So if I have to ask it specific questions and touch canned options for me to navigate through a predefined bot tree, if you will, or if it's staffed by a human being and I'm able to ask a question and have somebody within the organization answer it back. And as I did research for the chapter, a lot of what I was finding was consumers like going there just like I like to go there, probably more so on the millennial side and the younger generation, but it's now starting to get into the older clients as well. But the reality is being able to get into a chat conversation and have the answers being provided to you very quickly and easily right through a web interface or on your mobile device or any of those sorts of interfaces is becoming the preferred means of communication. So rather than spending time going through a navigational menu and browsing through their different sections and categories, I'll just, in whether you want to call it the lazy way or what, but I'll just go ahead and hop right over to the chat and say, hey, do you do X, Y, or Z, or how much does this cost, or do you offer this function, or what's, and while the information might very well be on their website someplace, might be in their FAQ section, I'm using chat functionality to have that conversation with someone or something within the organization to get me the answer that I'm looking for. And then I move on. There's even some financial institutions that are offering live staffed chatbots that are behind a secure login, and you can pull up a live chat that connects you securely to a banking officer within the organization. And while you always have the ability to download the mobile banking app and do that like you would normally, now they're offering chat capability where if I jumped in and Jeff just happened to be my banker back at the bank, I could originate a live real-time secure chat that's authenticated me as a customer. So Jeff back at the bank knows that it really is Eric. And then I can ask him what checks have cleared my account. I need you to transfer money. Can you check to make sure that my mortgage payment was debited on time? And I'm using Jeff back at the bank almost like a proxy or a replacement for an electronic banking system. But then Jeff at the bank also then is engaging with me more as a human and gets to know me as an individual and could also potentially uncover some other opportunities. Hey, it looks like you maybe aren't using your debit card to its fullest potential. Or, hey, have you ever thought about, using some other banking service like remote capture to be able to deposit checks? Or maybe when rates start dropping, I see that your mortgage rate might be a little high. Would you like me to connect you with one of our loan officers? We might be able to save you some money on refinancing your mortgage loan. A chat bot doesn't have that capability. So there's a hybrid approach to this concept of conversational marketing that I think it's really important that we all understand. Is it's not just an automated technology system that's on the back end answering canned questions and trying to use AI to predict what it is that you're talking about. Some of the better chat experiences are actually staffed with human beings that take the time to get to know you and interact with you. Because at the end of the day, what you really want to do is build that conversation and get someone talking to you. And the whole function of conversational marketing, it's almost like the whole concept of consultative selling. I liken the old school sales tactics of Mad Men back in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s of, sneaky tactics, always be selling, or always be closing, ABC, not ABS, always be closing. People don't necessarily go for that these days, but what people do like is when you take the time to get to know them and understand what their particular needs are, and through bot and AI and that messaging capability, you now open up a completely new digital channel that gives you that capacity to be able to learn. Because when those conversations are taking place, even if it's a conversation that's being staffed by a human within your organization, if you're using technology that's equipped to be able to monitor for what it is that you're talking about, you can classify someone and say, okay, this person's interested in a mortgage loan. So then after the chat is done, you can go ahead and you can check the little box and you can identify them as a potential mortgage homeowner persona, or they might be a small business customer, or whatever business you're in. You could start categorizing them into different areas within your organization. And then that's going to give you the ability to provide them with better follow-up information down the road. You might be able to tie that into your email newsletter. You might be able to tie that into personalized content on your website. So there's a lot of different ways that when you start that conversation and you start learning about that visitor, that you can take that data and you can deploy it into many of the other areas of your digital strategy where you've got touch points with them. We're having conversations right now with our devices. My Alexa is out of earshot, so I can say her name out loud, but certainly we've got Alexa, we've got Siri, we've got Google Assistant that's there. Those are all AI driven. Those are all platforms that we're talking to. Those are all platforms that are answering us questions. And a lot of times when we think about these conversations that we're having with these technologies, they have to be even smarter than just a regular search engine. Sometimes when you ask a question, these platforms will bring back maybe a list of results. But more often than not, they're taking what it is that you're asking for and using some behind the scenes technology and neuro-linguistic gobbledygook. And I'm not a neurolinguist, so I can't really get into the technology that's driving all of this. But they're actually parsing down what you're asking for and using their back-end database and all the data that's accessible to them to come back with the one result that they recommend. It's much different than the days of going just to Google and typing in a search term or a search phrase, or just, looking for something and you get, 4 advertisements, you get some local listings, you get 10 organic listings, you might get a couple more advertisements at the bottom. So if you go to Google or Bing or any of the search engines and you ask a question, they're certainly using technology and AI and some form of ranking algorithm to help ensure that the best information is going to be presented for you. But when you're using these messenger capabilities, they really are being forced to select one option for you. And sometimes that option is a great recommendation. Other times they totally miss the mark. And sometimes they bring back and say, well, here's a collection of results that we think might be appropriate for you. But one thing I know for sure is that capability, that experience is just going to continue to get better and better. I know one of the things with the Google Assistant that's kind of cool is you can have that question and answer process be more conversational. So I could say, how many people live in Detroit, Michigan? And it'll come back and it'll answer that question. And then I can follow back up and say, what's the weather there? And I don't have to restate, well, what's the weather in Detroit? Because conversationally, technology is starting to learn that I'm probably still referring to Detroit, or who's the mayor, or any of those sorts of things, and allowing for us to talk with our devices instead of just to them and have that interaction go on. When we think about the value associated, and those of you that grew up in the 80s might very well be smiling when you see this page. I'm curious to see if anybody that's attending live recognizes these books, because I have a handful of them that my mother was cleaning out the attic and she found. And I think I recognize pretty much all of these as being in my 1980s era library as a kid growing up. But when we think about the importance of cutting through the clutter, and by some accounts, we are exposed to up to 10,000 different marketing messages every single day. Now, some of those go in one ear and out the other, or we may not even pay attention to them, but we think about what we see in email, what we see online. If we're driving around, we're at the grocery store, we see advertisements in newspapers, what we read. And one of the things that you want to try to do is, if you get somebody's attention, you want to pull them in and keep their attention as long as you possibly can. And I admit, I would love to say otherwise, but I've never been much of a reader. I don't know why that's the case. I love podcasts. I love to watch television. Maybe I'm a little bit more visual, but I got into these choose your own adventure books when I was young because they provide you the ability to, and if you've never gone through one, you can go to archive, I think it's archive.org, which is a free repository you can sign up for, and they've got a lot of old reading material that you can actually get access to. And I actually flipped through the book Inside UFO 5440, and it was kind of cool because I felt like I was back in the 80s with my mullet haircut and parachute pants and getting ready to go play Dungeons and Dragons with my buddies. But you read these books and it gives you kind of a scenario, and then at the bottom of the page it says, do you want to do this or do you want to do that? And you might say, well, you see a bright light that flashes as you're on the airplane, and do you walk towards the light or do you ignore it? And if you walk towards the light, turn to page 56. If you ignore it, turn to page 24. And so every time you read the book, if you make a different decision, it's actually a different story. And the reason that I tell this, one is hopefully those of you that grew up in the 80s will go back and find your choose your own adventure books, or maybe go out to archive.org and flip through some and kind of reminisce and see what I'm talking about. But a good chatbot is doing this. I mean, this is basically the very early stages of a chatbot, because what you're doing with these choose your own adventure books is you're trying to predict and give someone a path that they can go down that allows for them to end up someplace. Now, in the books, it's always going to be a mystery because you don't know what's going to happen. If I go towards the light, do I get fried by an alien laser? Or if I ignore it, do they blow up the airplane that I'm on and I die that way? You don't really know. But as you think about a chatbot and the initial stages of building out that conversation, sit back with your team or maybe talk to some of your customers and have a good discussion around what's the logical path that somebody would follow if they're interested in learning more about your organization. And if I'm building a chatbot for a community bank, for example, I might want to have a discussion and say, welcome, my name's Banky and I'm the bank's online chatbot. Tell me a little bit about yourself. I might want to ask, are you interested in personal banking services or business banking services? Because it might be someone that's showing up that's interested in just getting a personal checking account or asking about overdraft protection. But if it's a business customer, then they might want to be interested in things like cash management or a commercial loan or other sorts of business banking services. So it's a good idea to be able to kind of segment that audience early on in the process to determine, well, which path, which adventure do we want to take them on? And as you kind of get them nailed down into a certain area, maybe I say, oh, I'm interested in personal banking services. Excellent. Do you own a home? Yes or no? Or, just thinking about the different questions that you would then ask. At any point during that process, if it becomes cumbersome or maybe the answer is not right there, I think the one thing that a lot of the chatbots fall down on when they're built is, while this choose your own adventure type mentality can certainly be a really good way of helping to segment your customers and bring them through that conversation process, you want to make sure that you give them the ability to always tap out and say, I'd like to talk to a person. And if it's 10 o'clock at night and you just simply don't have staffing at 10 o'clock at night to be able to take care of that, then you need to figure out, well, what are we going to do when somebody wants to chat with us at 10 o'clock at night? Maybe the chatbot is programmed to come back and say, that's great, we totally understand, but all of our humans or everybody here at the office, or we're currently, not in the office, given the normal operating hours, and then allow for them to just provide some simple info and say, but we would be happy to get in touch with you first thing next business morning. Give us your information and we'll be in touch. So now you could turn that into a potential lead capture process. And if you're using a chatbot that's powered by Facebook, for example, I might already be logged in on that computer as Eric Cook. So you could just, instead of asking for my information, you could say, looks like this is Eric. Is that correct? And if you say yes, then Facebook will allow for the provision of your email address that's associated with your Facebook account. Then you could ask for the phone number or whatnot, but you can make that collection process a lot easier. So while you want to make sure that that chat kind of message, that conversation allows for the visitor to pick their own adventure and to be able to hopefully get where they want to go, at some point in time, you need to make sure that you don't forget that the human component, the personal service, really, really needs to be there, because otherwise you're just going to end up with a lot of frustrated chat visitors because the chat is not going to answer 100% of the questions that people have. So when we think about the three different types of messaging or conversational, chatbots, if you will, they range in simplicity from informational all the way down to advisory with complexity, and they learn and kind of grow over time. But your informational bots are usually where people start. Well, they'll take the frequently asked questions, or they'll data mine the information that's been typed into their website's search box. So if you've got search on your website, there's ways that you can get access to what people are looking for. And if people are coming to your website and searching for that information, it's probably a good idea to stick that into your chat bot. Because if somebody's coming in and they're always typing in, what are your hours? How much do you cost? Do you offer an annual discount? Those are all things that if you put into a chat bot, you could generate some conversation. And then instead of them just doing the search and coming to a page, you could pull them into one of those adventures that you create that allows you to walk through and maybe get a little bit more information about them. The next level of complexity gets into the transactional elements, and the transactional elements are going to be really based off of the sophistication of the purchase. I'll give you an example. I'm a cyclist. I love to ride bikes, and Facebook knows it because I get proactively marketed all sorts of bicycle gadgets and gizmos because I talk a lot about cycling. I post a lot of information about cycling on my personal Facebook profile. So I was browsing Facebook and I saw an advertisement that actually came up, and it was for a little red LED tail light that had some lasers that would draw a bicycle lane behind you in the dusk, so that as cars approached you, it would almost define an area behind your bicycle that you're in, so it'll just draw a little bit more attention. I recently had a good friend of mine who unfortunately was hit and killed while he was on his bike, so it was a little top of mind for me. So it was maybe a little bit of an emotional purchase, but the light was only like $12, so it was much more of an impulse buy. When I clicked on that advertisement, I wasn't taken to the company's webpage. I was brought into a bot conversation. And the bot, through Facebook Messenger, actually talked me through the transaction, confirmed my name, asked for my credit card information, confirmed my address, and then gave me the option after the transaction was done if I was interested in receiving updates and notifications on the status of my order. And of course, I tapped yes. And as my order was processed, because I'm sure that order was sent to some manufacturing company in China where they were being built, unfortunately, it wasn't exactly the high quality tail light like I thought it was going to be, but luckily it was, $15, so it's not like it's a huge deal. But that entire transaction was done all through Facebook Messenger. And I know that during last year's F8 conference, Mark Zuckerberg over at Facebook made the statement, and I don't know the dollar amount, but the millions of dollars, maybe even billions, I'm not sure, but a lot of transactional activity is being done through their platform, WhatsApp, as small businesses are using that to be able to communicate with their customers. And if they're interested in looking at an inventory or a product category or catalog, they can go in and they can actually use WhatsApp as an e-commerce process, and they're selling goods and services directly through WhatsApp without having to drive anybody back to a website, having a sophisticated e-commerce shopping cart. Everything is being done and facilitated right through the WhatsApp platform. The last area, which is a little bit more sophisticated of all, is the advisory services. And this is where the platforms are listening to you, they're learning, they're paying attention, they get smarter over time, they're taking past They're taking past experiences and building that in. And so over time, the more you use it, the more people that get into the platform, the more questions that are being asked, the more results that people have when they click on one answer versus another. Those things are coming out, and it's making that a lot more intelligent. Not that we're going to be, getting to the Terminator world with, the aliens or the machines coming to take us over, but the advisory functionality of bots is really where things are headed, because as data goes into that process, even if the system doesn't know what to do with it at that point in time, the data is being collected and analyzed, and at some point might be able to be leveraged as part of that advisory process, and to make that bot or that conversation much more valuable to the end user. So at the end of the day, they get a good answer that's relevant to them, that's more accurate than it would have been 3 months ago, 6 months ago, 12 months ago. One of the more famous advisory-based intelligent learning systems is IBM's Deep Blue. Gary Kasparov, the famous chess grandmaster, was able to beat Deep Blue in its, interactive and virtual learning service for a number of games, until ultimately he couldn't, and the system just got smarter and smarter and smarter. You've got IBM Watson that went on the Jeopardy show. You've got Google. They produced a platform that went out, and one of the games, I've never played it, but the platform Go, the game Go, the blue and the white little things, Google's AlphaGo project, actually was able to beat a grandmaster at the Go platform. And so, the technology, the advisory capabilities, once those things get smarter, then they're rolled into consumer. I know that there are financial institutions that are leveraging some of Watson technology to be able to look at transactional behavior, predict what types of products and services customers might best be interested in. I think we've all come into you think of Amazon and how well they know you and how well they know the information and the products and services that you likely would be interested in. All of that is based off of the capability of taking this artificial intelligence and building it into a platform and turning it into something that can come back from an advisory recommendation perspective. So Jason Hendricks is a good friend of mine, and he's one of the managing directors over at a company called FinTech Forge. And as he and I have talked a number of times about technology and the shift of digital and consumers, and where technology really fits versus where the human element really needs to stay in place, this is one of his quotes that I absolutely love. And I don't know as if it's ever been written down anywhere, but I've heard him say it a number of times. So when I was writing the chapter, I actually called him and I said, can you give me that quote so that I make sure that I get it right? And I think he emailed it to me. But looking at the difference between personalized and personable, and how machines are really good at personalizing things because they've got the data. If we go back to a chatbot experience and we ask, what best, when you fill out a form and the form is asking you a question like, what best describes your job role, or what industry are you in? What they're doing is they're trying to create a profile for you where you might say, well, my role is marketing and my industry is healthcare. So now they've got you in an area where they can provide you personalized content that might be related to marketing and healthcare. But that doesn't always guarantee that that interaction is going to be personable, because those interactions, while they might be related to healthcare and marketing, does the email show up and does it have your first name? Does it know other little things about you? Does it remember things that you've told? Do you have the ability to pick up the phone and talk to someone if you need to? Those are the elements that incorporate the personable nature. So while certainly data sources and all these other sorts of processing capabilities and technology horsepower help with that personalized, humans are really the ones, and this is where machines are never going to be able to take our place. At least I don't see it happening in my lifetime. But humans are going to be the ones that are going to have to be involved to make sure that whatever goes on, when we need it, when the customer needs it, they've got that personable interaction opportunity to be able to get to. And this is where I'm going to talk about the whole concept of the uncanny valley. So I'm going to go back. I'm going to open up my little chat window here and see whether anybody has typed in what they know. Now, granted, I've given plenty of time for you to go out to Google, and you could do a Google search for uncanny valley or what does uncanny valley mean. So you're not allowed to cheat. You can't use Google. But the whole concept of the uncanny valley is when you, as a provider of services, are using technology to try to make it seem like there's a human involved, and it gets almost to the point where it's done a good job, but then there's just something that's not quite right, and you go in the opposite direction, and instead of helping the customer or the visitor or the chatter, if you will, instead of helping that process, you've now creeped them out and you've caused them to question, and now they feel like technology is trying to be too humanistic and it's failing, and now they're just weirded out by you. I don't know how many of you have ever had the opportunity to see Sophia, the AI robot. If you saw a picture of her, you'd recognize her, but it's the robot that's got a lot of AI built within it. Her face talks, her eyes move, her mouth, her nose wrinkles, she smiles, she experiences quote unquote emotion, but the back of her head is open with circuitry and wires and other sorts of diodes. And you can tell that while you might be looking at her, and if you looked at her from afar, you might mistake her for actually being a real human. But when you get close, you realize that it's a computer and it's not really human. And if you've been having a conversation and then you realize that you've been tricked, you might actually feel duped by it. And I can tell you, I've been on a number of chats where I've started the conversation and I've thought that I was interacting with a human being until it got to the point where I got into a bot loop and I asked the question and I got the exact same answer. So now all of a sudden, instead of being impressed with the technology and the chat, the conversational capabilities of that service provider, I actually flipped 180 degrees and I got pissed. Well, maybe not pissed. Maybe that's a little strong. But I was disappointed and certainly not nearly as happy as I was prior to discovering the fact that I was just participating. We've all gotten those robocalls, and I think just in the last week I've gotten 4 of them. The call comes in. Hey, it's Eric over at the awards center. I just want to make sure that you can hear me. Can you hear me okay? And then there's a long pause. And if you've never gotten one of those calls before, which I would suspect probably isn't the case any longer, but if that was the first time you got the call, you might have just said, yeah, I can hear you just fine. And the platform is planned on some sort of a verbal response. If there's no verbal response, because I just sit on the phone and wait to hear if they say, is somebody there? Hello? Then I know that's a real human. Otherwise, it just drops. But the first time that you get one of those calls and you get the, hey, this is Eric over at the reward center. Just want to make sure, can you hear me okay? And you say, yeah, I can hear you just fine. Oh, great. Well, I just want to reach out to you today because we have got some good news for you. And through that entire conversation, you might spend the first 30 or 45 seconds interacting with what you feel is a human, someone that actually is interested in making sure that you can hear them, until you realize that it's just a recorded platform with a little bit of AI built within it. That's when you've actually stepped into the uncanny valley, and that's when there's a problem. Now, the state of California got so excited about this that they actually enacted legislation, I believe, that requires, if you're interacting with some sort of a bot or other sorts of technology, you have to disclose whether it's a real person or not. Now, I don't live in California. I don't know whether these calls are coming out of California, but I would be willing to bet that those phone calls likely are not allowed in the state of California. And whether or not I've got any California residents on today's webinar, I'd be curious to hear whether you get those. But you have to disclose whether you are working with a bot. And there's some people that have kind of talked about, well, whether or not you need to maybe even give your bot a name. For example, Bank of America has an AI bot service helper they've called Erica. At the end of today's presentation, I'm going to share with you a success story from Amtrak. I know I'm going completely in the opposite direction. I usually talk about technology and banking, and I'm going to talk about trains. Shocker. But they've got a bot that they've named Julie, and how Julie has actually really benefited their organization on their website, generating revenue, reducing costs. So there's a lot of different industries that are leveraging this technology and being able to use it to their advantage and giving them names so that you can somewhat humanize with them, but also make it very clear that, hey, I'm a bot, I'm an automated assistant, I'm as smart as I can be, but at any point in time, if you need to talk to one of the experts here in the office, just let me know and I'll go ahead and I'll get somebody for you. So as you're thinking about your technology and your conversational marketing, this choose your own adventure, if you will, you really want to be careful that you don't fall into this uncanny valley and give visitors to your site or through your service the impression that they might be talking to a human when they're not, because when they discover it, it's actually going to have a negative effect. Facebook, I've already mentioned a couple of times, but the two biggest messaging apps that are out there right now, Facebook Messenger and certainly WhatsApp, two powerhouse platforms that are allowing people to have secure, encrypted, one-to-one or one-to-few. The change in the evolution that's going on now within the world of social media is, and it'll be really interesting to see if the scales tip in the other direction, because there's a lot of people that are coming back to Facebook because they want to hear what their friends are doing and maybe participating in more group conversations. But the reason that Facebook is so bullish on their messenger is they really want to bring people connected to one another, and the messenger platforms give them the ability to provide the service that does that. And just like they're now very excited about groups, being able to bring a smaller group of specific like-minded, interest-focused people into a group as opposed to participating in general Facebook conversation that could be all over the place. Messaging capability brings that even further down, where you can have one-on-one or one to a few. You can create a family group. We've got a number of groups that we've created within our organization, within our household, on WhatsApp that allow for us to communicate with friends that are overseas. We've got a group chat within our organization that we use. We tried implementing Slack. We ended up coming back into WhatsApp because it just had more of a conversational feel for us. So not always does conversational marketing mean that you have to use it just for revenue generation. You can use it for your internal communications and be able to then archive those conversations and have them available as a resource down the road. But over 46 billion messages sent on these two platforms every minute. And that number is not showing any signs of slowing down. And we've already talked about the e-commerce capabilities within each of those platforms. So the reason that I think the conversational discussion within your organization needs to happen, and we'll tie it back to CHATBOTS, I guess, because that tends to be what most people think about when they think of conversational marketing, because that's the physical kind of end interface that you're with. But the conversational marketing strategy that exists behind the scenes is still very important. One is you've got improved engagement with your audience. It's been shown through studies. You keep better connected through the journey. Again, imagine if somebody wanted to go to your website and they just wanted to search for something in your search bar versus going to your chatbot and asking a question. You can still have that information answered automatically by data that you have on hand. But if you pull them into a chat conversation, that then gives you the opportunity to then ask other questions, and you might be able to engage them in some other conversation that could lead to another opportunity. When you think about your conversion rates and getting people to do what you would like them to do when they show up, either to your website or they open up your email or they click on an advertisement, the open rates and click-through rates, Neil Patel did a study with, I think it was with MobileMonkey and MailChimp, but he did a comparison between open rates of email, which are typically in the 20% range, and if you get 2 or 3, maybe 4% click-through rate on an email, you're doing good. Whereas if he got people to sign up for messaging, so they've gone to his Facebook page or they've gone to his website or they've interacted with him, he gets them into a bot and says, hey, would you be interested in future updates and information? Would you like to learn more about digital marketing strategies? Would you like to learn the best tips about search engine optimization or conversion? When people opt in and then he sends a follow-up message, instead of being satisfied with 20 or 30% open rates, he was getting over 80% open rates on those messages because they're outside of the inbox. They're not being cluttered with all the other email that you're getting. It's more of a short, concise, to the point message, so you're more likely to read it quickly. And if that message had some sort of a call to action, like, hey, we just released a new white paper, or hey, click here, or you've asked for security updates, or maybe you want to push out COVID notifications for your business or interest rate information, now somebody's going to be more likely to click on that and jump right back to either your website or a landing page or some other action that you want them to take. So 50% click-through rates and engagement versus 3 or 4% if you're going to get that through an email. So tremendous conversion and engagement interaction. It's going to really give you a benefit to be able to stand out. And then finally, cost reduction. One of the platforms that we work with is a platform called Live Person, and they've done some studies and said when you take conversational commerce into play, which is their variation of conversational marketing, but when you take that and you incorporate bots and automated intelligence and some other sorts of, suggested responses, a platform like that can 10x the engagement and support than just a human agent by themselves. And granted, a human agent doing those conversations can still manage more in a messenger environment than they can just through a call center, because remember, when somebody calls you on the phone, you answer the phone, you're on that conversation, you really can't do anything else. Whereas if I'm an agent, I can manage maybe 3 or 4 chat conversations and use my skills. Hopefully you just make sure that you don't send a message to one that shouldn't go. So you got to be really careful with that. But, there's training that will help to prevent that from happening. But certainly the reduction of costs. So I'm going to wrap with one of the case studies that I share in the book. And I'll be honest, I was kind of shocked when I read this, but I was pretty impressed because, I don't really think of Amtrak as an innovator in technology until you realize, it's like any other big transportation logistical, organization. I mean, they got a lot of moving parts. They've got a lot of data. They got to get people safely from point A to point B. And so when you think about just the size of their organization, serving 30 million customers per year, and their site's getting over 400,000 website visitors every single day. So they're getting a ton of activity. And if all of that has to be taken care of by a human, obviously that's going to be a little bit of a challenge or a lot of a challenge. So they released their bot. And if you go to their website, you can go to the Ask Julie area, which it clearly defines her as your virtual assistant. Julie's not a real person, although that picture might be of someone within Amtrak. But that is defined and very clearly disclosed as a virtual assistant. But she gives you some things that she can do when you start initiating a chat with her. And based off of Julie's capabilities, they've seen, a tremendous return on their investment, because the savings that she's brought to the organization versus what it costs to deploy and maintain have been, an 8x return there. They've been able to increase their bookings because Julie's more intelligently able to make recommendations and see things that maybe a human agent wouldn't. Of course, they've been able to save customer service expense because she's processing all of these transactions and conversations that a human would have to do. So they've been able to keep their customer service expenses down. Over the last year, Julie's answered over 5 million questions that likely go into that $1 million of customer savings. But the last number there that I think is super important is when someone goes on the website and they book through Julie versus just calling and talking to an agent, they did an analysis, and the bookings that were done through Julie's assistance actually generated 30% more revenue because she was programmed to look for other ways to be able to intelligently and comfortably, without seeming, now, if she was making all these recommendations that were offending customers, then her bookings would be less. But they've actually figured out through the algorithm how she could make better recommendations for people that not only get them served quickly and efficiently without having a human have to do it, but they figured out how to make those bookings more valuable to the company and sell, well, you could upgrade to a premium cabin. Would you like to have, the dining package or maybe the alcohol package if it's going to be a cross-country event? So being able to then push those because they happen consistently and they happen at the right time to the right audience. And those are the types of things that when all of this gets tied together, those are the types of results that likely can be transferred into any organization that wants to embrace the whole concept of conversational marketing and being able to have that two-way dialogue with your customer and your audience. So that concludes Chapter 7. Still suggest that you hop out and get the book and read it, but that's kind of a nutshell of where things are at in the world of conversational marketing. So I'm just going to do a quick little check to see if there's any additional questions, comments, or thoughts from the audience. Going once, going twice. There being none, we're going to go ahead and we're going to wrap the show for today. So I thank you all for attending today's show live. And if you're watching this in a recording, thanks for checking it out. I do see we got a question here. We have a thank you. You're welcome, Jennifer. My pleasure. So enjoy the remainder of your week. Stay safe, stay isolated, stay distant, but don't stay disconnected. I mean, you can leverage a lot of technology to keep connected. Now might be a good time to fire up a Zoom meeting, although that's kind of now under a little bit of scrutiny as it relates to privacy. So you want to be a little careful of that. But you've got video chat capabilities likely on your phone, or just pick up and make a call and talk to someone that you haven't talked to in a while. The human voice and the interaction and just, a genuine, hey, how you doing, is really going to go a long way in today's environment. So I would encourage you to do that. We'll look forward to seeing you on a future episode of Free Webinar Wednesdays, where we're going to continue our conversation and discussion about the Digital Minds book. So I'll be on the show with a guest author next. So keep an eye on our social channels. We'll be pushing out promotional material when that's announced. And until then, make it a great week. And thanks for joining me here on the show. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.